Hello all, in today's class we are going to learn one more important topic under database management system, which is triggers and active databases in database management system. Here, formal definition for trigger is given, which is a procedure and it is automatically invoked by database management system in response to the changes to the database. We can say that the trigger is some set of instructions which are automatically executed or it is fired in response to the changes made by an event on a particular table that is stored in the database. What sort of changes that you can make to the table so that the trigger gets activated? So changes can be anything which comes under database manipulation language. That is performing insert operation on a table or updating some data onto particular column or performing a delete operation onto the table. Any sort of DML commands that are performed, then the trigger gets activated or it is invoked by the database management system automatically. And this is also responsible by the database administrator. Coming to active database, a database with a set of associated triggers is generally called as active database. In the sense, the term active signifies that the database management system is going to react automatically to the changes in the data or predefined events. Here, in this case, we can consider the triggers as a primary mechanism in order to make the database active. So collectively, we can say the database is a set of associated triggers. Now we will learn more detail about the triggers and what are the parts that it includes. Here we mainly have event, condition, and action. What is an event? Event is a change to the database which activates the trigger. So as discussed before, when you want the trigger to get activated, trigger gets activated only when there are some changes made to the database. So what sort of changes can be made to the database? Any DML operations are considered as an event. Condition, a query that is run when the trigger is activated is called as a condition. Generally, we know whenever the condition is met, some sort of data can be retrieved from the table. So similarly, if the trigger wants to perform certain action, then the condition has to be met. That is known as condition, which is another part of the trigger. And finally, we have action. Action specifies that what operation is made so that the trigger gets activated. Upon insert operation, the trigger needs to get activated, or upon delete or update operation, the trigger needs to get activated. So that is about the action. Now let us learn different types of triggers. Namely, we have statement level trigger, row level trigger, before triggers, and after triggers. Statement level trigger is going to get activated only once, no matter how many rows are affected in the table. Coming to row level trigger, for every row that is specified in a table, the trigger is going to get activated each time. Before triggers and after triggers specifies that when the trigger needs to get activated, that is before the changes that you make to the database or after the changes that you make to the database. When the user wants the trigger to get activated, that needs to be specified during the creation of the trigger itself. Let us take an example to better understand what is statement level trigger and row level trigger. Let's say if an update command updates 100 rows, then a row level trigger is fired 100 times. Whereas if it is a statement level trigger, it is fired only once. So that is the difference between the statement and row level trigger. Now we will see the syntax for creating a trigger. Here, trigger is created along with its name. We will be using a create as a command we use in order to create a trigger. So here we have trigger name. You need to specify trigger name. Let's say ABC. You can give any name in the space of the trigger name. Before or after. This specifies when the trigger needs to get activated, as discussed before. Before the changes made to the database or after the changes you make to the database, when you want the trigger to get activated, you need to specify either of these things. Next, upon what operations you make onto the table name. You need to specify the table name because the database contains so many tables inside it, on which table, if the operations are made, that is insert, update, or delete, the trigger gets activated. You have to specify the table name and also the operations you make on that particular table name. For each row is the row level trigger. As discussed before, For every row, the trigger needs to get activated when you specify for each row. Trigger body. Trigger body is the instructions that you write inside this particular body. So those instructions will get executed, and finally when the table is displayed after the trigger gets activated, you can find certain sort of changes. Now we will see the execution of the trigger using different operations, once by insert, next another by update, and then by delete operations made onto the table. Now let us see the execution of trigger. I'm going to display a table which I have already created. Select, start from the table name. So this is the table with the two columns, ID and salary. Now I'm going to create a trigger in order to make changes onto the table. Here we are going to use delimiter. It is because the query is not written in a single line. As we are using multiple lines to write a query, it is necessary to make use of this delimiter. So as discussed before, the syntax for the trigger is what? Create trigger, trigger name. T4 is my trigger name. You have to use before or after when you want the trigger to get activated. Here I'm using before. So when an insert operation is made newly onto this particular table name, for every row, the trigger needs to get activated. So what is the operation that the trigger has to do? So whenever the salary column is there, so for the salary column, whenever the user is trying to input some value, the value along with it, 1,000 rupees is to get automatically added, and it is to be stored into this column name. So for that, we have written some logic over here. New dot salary is equal to new dot salary plus 1,000. Insert into table name values 3, 8,000. It says query OK and one row affected. Now let us display the table and check whether the third row is inserted or not. Select star from table name. Yes, the third row is also inserted by automatically adding 1,000 rupees into it. Now let us make use of the delete command and check whether the operations made are reflected to the table or not. Again, I am going to create another table. So let the table be Y. I'm going to create it using create command. Create table, table name, and the same column names I'm going to display here also. ID int, salary int. Now the table is created. I wanted to display the table for you. Disk Y. Now, as we have not inserted any values here, these are the column names which I have given. Now, whenever I try to delete any particular row from the G table, that row should get automatically stored in the Y table which I have created. So this can be done by making use of the trigger again. Now the trigger name which I have given is a backup trigger name. It is because any row deleted from the G table is automatically backed up into the Y table. So I have given backup. You can give any name here. And before delete on G, before the delete operation is made on the G, the trigger is going to get activated for every row. So when we are performing the delete operation, the values are to be inserted into the Y table. So here I have included Y table. Old.id, old.salary, which means what? The values from the G table are retrieved and they are stored in this particular column names in the Y table. So that is why old.id, old.salary has been given. Now I'm using the delete operation. So what is the command we have? Delete from table name G, where ID is equal to any row I wanted to delete. So let's say I'm going to delete ID is equal to 3, that particular row from the G table. Now I'm going to check whether the deleted row is present in the Y table or not. For that, I'm going to display the table of Y. Select star from Y table. Now you can see from G, we have deleted and it says query okay. The deleted row is now present in the Y table. Let us check whether this row is again there in the G table or not, so that I'm displaying the table for G also. Select start from G. You can see only 1 and 2 IDs are present, whereas the third row is in Y table. Now let us see how we are going to create or activate a trigger upon performing an update operation onto the table. So here you can see a trigger name TIT is created and update operation is used on the table G. Every time the trigger is activated for every row in the G table, and this is the logic which I have written. So any update operations you make onto the G table, that operations or the values has to be, new values has to be reflected into the Y table. Now let us try to update any row in a G table and let's see what sort of changes the trigger is going to make and find whether those changes are reflected in the Y table or not. Firstly, I'm using update command. Update table name G, set salary is equal to 3,000 or 30,000, where ID is equal to 1. And I'm going to use the dollar symbol here. So it says query OK. That means the updated information is reflected to the table, right? Now I wanted to display the table of this Y as well as G. Select start from G. So the changes which I have made is what? 30,000. Previously, for one, what is the salary we have given? 7,000. And the changes what we made is what? 30,000. Now let us check whether this changes which we made for the first tuple in G is reflected in the Y table or not. So I'm going to display Y table. Select start from Y. You can see two rows. So the first is what? This is the first row which we have deleted from the G table. So that has got stored in the Y table. And second is what? The update operations you made on the G table, those updations are again reflected to the Y table. So thereby 130,000 is also present in the Y table. So this is how we will be making use of the triggers by using insert, update and delete operations. Hope you have understood today's lecture. Meet you in the next session. Thank you.